I was worth $340 million at 58. I am 71 now and share a room with a man who talks in his sleep. You think intelligence protects you? I graduated from Wharton. I built a Fortune 500 pharmaceutical company from my garage. My company was worth $2.8 billion. My name appeared in Fortune magazine 3 years running, and I lost everything. Someone needs to say it out loud, and there is no one left to listen but you. It started with a view. That's what I want you to understand. Not with a bet or a card game or a desperate moment. It started with success so complete that I believed I had solved something fundamental about how the world worked. I had cracked the code. I was on the 52nd floor of a building on Park Avenue in Manhattan in the year 2001, standing at floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city move beneath me like it was a system I had already mastered. The Hudson River was gray-green in the afternoon light. I remember actually thinking that this was permanent, that I had built something so solid, so real, that nothing could touch it. My assistant screened 40 calls a day. 40. Investment bankers, hedge fund managers, pharmaceutical executives from every major corporation in America, all of them wanting something from me. And I could give it to them or not give it to them. And either way, they would call back. That is the drug before the drug, you understand? That is the first addiction nobody talks about. The certainty that your presence matters, that the world is structured to serve you because you are competent and smart and you have already won. I had a home in Greenwich, Connecticut, 8,400 square feet. Not the biggest house in town, but the right house, in the right neighborhood, on the right street. My wife Sandra had a garden with roses that won competitions, blue ribbons, the kind of roses that made other women in Connecticut stop and actually ask her for advice. My son Michael was 15 when I was at the peak. He played lacrosse. Do you know what that is? That is a sport for children whose fathers have already decided they will be successful. He had long hair then, which drove me absolutely insane. And he would come home from practice with grass stains on his white jersey, and Sandra would hand him a glass of fresh orange juice, squeezed that morning, and he would tell her about his day while I listened from the doorway, feeling like I was watching someone else's life, some beautiful thing behind glass. My daughter Elaine was studying to be a teacher, not a lawyer, not a banker, not someone with obvious ambition. And I remember feeling this strange pride in her for that. She was choosing something that mattered to her instead of something that looked impressive to other people. I would have learned from that if I had been paying attention. The Gulfstream 4 was painted dark blue with gold trim. I would fly to Palm Beach on Friday afternoons with a glass of scotch and my tie already loosened. And the world below me would look like a map of somewhere that mattered. I owned 14 luxury vehicles. 14. I remember parking them all in my driveway one afternoon and just standing there looking at them. And I couldn't remember what I had been thinking when I bought number 8 or number 11. They had all seemed urgent at the time. They had all seemed necessary. But there was a crack, and it started in Atlantic City in 1998. I needed something that had nothing to do with the company, a place where my net worth didn't matter. I told Sandra I was meeting clients. I was lying already. The Tropicana. The smell of the casino was like coming home. I sat at a blackjack table and I won, then lost, then won again. I felt like I was breathing for the first time in months. Nobody was depending on me. There was just a simple system. You either got lucky or you didn't. I went back the next weekend, and the next. Atlantic City became a ritual. The drive down the parkway became a meditation. The turn into the parking garage became a release valve. I started taking $5,000 with me instead of $200, then $15,000. Then I rented a suite at the Tropicana and started going every weekend. I told Sandra I had to be in New Jersey for work. She stopped asking questions. In 2002, I went to Las Vegas and the Bellagio. The baccarat room had dark leather chairs. The dealer knew my name. I started with $50,000 bets. I lost $80,000 my first night, and I felt alive. I felt like the universe was taking me seriously. The escalation happened like gravity. My bets went from $50,000 to $100,000 to $250,000. I was losing $80,000 to $120,000 every weekend. In August 2004, I lost $360,000. I drove out into the desert at dawn with nowhere to be. I started moving money from my company. The first time was a loan to myself, a bridge loan. I told myself it was temporary. $400,000, reclassified as business development expenses. I replaced it the next quarter, but I had proven to myself that the money was there, that the accounts were fluid, that the company I had built was not a fortress. It was just a machine that made money, and I had the keys. My CFO was a man named Paul Reardon. When he asked about the numbers, I said, "Paul, you worry about the numbers I tell you to worry about." He never asked again. By 2006, I was taking $2 million a quarter. $2 million here, $1.8 million there. I was creating false invoices, fake vendor accounts, shell companies. I was stealing from my 340 employees, some of whom had families, some of whom had mortgages. Sandra noticed the distance. She said to me once, "Where are you?" Not "Where have you been?" "Where are you?" I lied. Michael asked me to come to his lacrosse tournament. He was 17. I said yes, then went to Vegas instead. I had flowers sent with a card signed by me. That is who I was. I was 48 years old, and I was committing securities fraud. I was stealing millions of dollars because losing money at a poker table felt better than being successful at anything real. The moment the cards were dealt, nothing else mattered. On a Tuesday morning in October of 2008, my attorney called. "Robert, we have a situation." The DOJ had opened an investigation. The whistleblower was Paul Reardon, my CFO, the man I had silenced with a look. He had called the Department of Justice and given them everything. I sat in my office on the 52nd floor. of Park Avenue and called an emergency board meeting. The board meeting lasted 11 minutes. I sat in the chair I had occupied for 19 years, and not one of them would make eye contact. My chairman said, "We accept your resignation, effective immediately." I stood up. I walked out. I took the elevator down 52 floors, and I did not know what I was supposed to do next. I drove to Greenwich that night. The house was lit from inside. I could see Sandra through the kitchen window. She was at the table, and there was a manila folder in front of her, and she was reading something with a pen in her hand. I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes before I went inside. When I did, she looked up and she said, "I know." Not I suspect, not I think, I know. She had known for 3 years. She had hired a private investigator. She had evidence. She had an attorney. She was leaving me, but she wanted to do it quietly, for the sake of our children. I called Michael that night. He was in his 2nd year of medical school in Boston. He answered the phone and I said, "Michael, something has happened." He listened while I told him about the investigation. I told him about the company. I told him about the money. And he said, "Dad, I have patience. I have responsibilities. I can't do this. I can't be your son right now." And he hung up the phone. I tried calling him the next day. His number was disconnected. The auction began in January 2009. The Greenwich home was sold. Sandra's blue dishes went to estate sales. Her rose garden was bulldozed. My art collection was sold in lots. The Gulfstream 4 was repossessed at Teterboro. All 14 vehicles were sold within 3 months. The SEC concluded I had committed securities fraud and misdirected $47 million over 10 years. $47 million. The number seemed abstract, like it belonged to someone else's life. I spent 6 months in minimum security. My hair turned completely white. I aged in a way that had nothing to do with time. When I was released, there was nowhere to go. My wife would not return my calls. Elaine sent me a message through a lawyer. Michael had married a woman named Jennifer who had never heard my name. I had a granddaughter who would grow up believing her grandfather was either dead or had never existed. I spent the first weeks at a Motel 6 in Edison with $412 in my checking account. A man from prison knew someone who ran a transitional housing facility in Newark. $180 a month. I moved in on a Tuesday. The room is small. There is a single bed. There is a dresser with 3 of the 4 drawers broken. There is a window that looks out onto Broad Street, and if I stand at the window, I can see people going somewhere, going toward something, going with purpose. There are 2 men I share the room with. One of them is named Gerald. The other's name changes. Gerald has been there for 4 years. He talks in his sleep. He calls out a woman's name, sometimes more than once in a single night. I have learned not to listen too closely. I have learned how to exist in a room with other people's pain. I eat at Sacred Heart Church Soup Kitchen on Mondays and Thursdays. They serve a hot meal around noon. Vegetable soup, a roll, sometimes meatloaf. I have learned to say thank you to the volunteers without shame. or at least with a specific kind of shame that does not show on my face. There is a woman there named Mrs. Patricia who works the serving line. She smiles at me every time I come, and I do not know if she is smiling at me or at the idea of helping someone. And the not knowing is strangely comforting. I ride NJ Transit trains sometimes with no destination, just movement. I sit with my forehead against the window and watch the landscape move. I watch other people who have somewhere to be, living in a world where they matter. I envy them in a pure and clean way. I sit in Newark Penn Station in the afternoons, a beautiful building, all marble and light. I watch the departures board flip. People are always leaving for Philadelphia, Trenton, Washington, going somewhere that is not here. I have not left Newark in 4 years. Sometimes I walk past a pawn shop window. There is one on Broad Street and one on Market Street. I see watches in those windows, and sometimes they are gold watches with leather straps, and one of them looks very much like my grandfather's Rolex Datejust. I never look at them for very long. I was the one who sold the real one. I pawned it at a shop called Lucky Pawn on the Las Vegas Strip in September of 2008. The pawnbroker did not even look at it carefully. He weighed it, he checked the movement, he said $800, take it or leave it. I took it. I used the money at the baccarat table that night, and I lost it within 4 hours. My grandfather gave me that watch when I graduated from Wharton. He said, "Robert, this watch has been in this family for 40 years. Take care of it. Let it remind you that time is the only thing we have." He was a man who worked with his hands his entire life. He built things. He was proud of me because I was going to do something different, something bigger, something that mattered in a way that was bigger than carpentry or welding or building a house with your own hands. I sold his watch for $800 so I could gamble with it. At 71 years old, I understand that there is no redemption arc coming. There is no moment where I rebuild. There is no book deal. There is no speaking circuit where I warn other businessmen about the dangers of gambling addiction. There is no final chapter where I reconcile with my son. My daughter sends me $200 a month. She does it as an act of obligation, not love. Michael has his life. He has his wife. He has his daughter. I am not part of that world, and I will not be. That is the correct outcome. The thing I miss most is not the money. The money is abstract. I cannot even visualize what $2.8 billion looks like. The thing I miss most is a specific Tuesday afternoon in Greenwich in the year 2005. It was autumn. There was light coming through the kitchen windows. Sandra was humming while she made soup. Michael was at the kitchen table doing his homework. He was 17 years old, and he was complaining about calculus. He said, "Why do I need to know this? I'm going to be a doctor. I'm not going to use calculus." And Sandra said, "You're going to use everything. You just don't know it yet." I was standing in the doorway, and I remember thinking it was boring. I remember thinking the conversation was mundane. I remember thinking that I should be somewhere else doing something that mattered more. And I was not present. I was not there. I was somewhere in my mind where the stakes were higher and the outcome mattered more, and I was winning at something. That moment lasted 4 minutes, maybe 5. It was the last ordinary, perfect moment I will ever have, and I was not present for it because I believed there would be infinite moments like it in the future. I believed that I had time. I do not have time now. I have Gerald's voice in the dark. I have the soup kitchen twice a week. I have the bench at Newark Penn Station. I have the pawn shop window with a Rolex inside that isn't mine. The addiction does not care about your degree. It does not care about your company, your family, your children. It took every one of those things from me and left me in a room in Newark with Gerald's voice in the dark. If you recognize the pattern, the lies you tell people you love, the way the casino floor feels more real than any room in your own home, stop now. Not tomorrow. Not after one more hand. The other side of this is gray and permanent, and there is no clock to reverse. Stay with this. Subscribe. Not because I want an audience, because I have run out of people to warn, and someone listening now might still have time I do not have.